If you're dealing with tax debt, you might be wondering, will this stuff ever go away? Is there any way that I can possibly get out of this? Well, I've got news for you. There's a little known thing called the CSED, Collection Statute Expiration Date, and it might just be your ticket for your tax debt just vanishing like that. So join me on the other side and I'll tell you all the juicy details. Welcome to Tax Chit Chat, the place where we talk all things tax all the time. In this episode, we're going to talk about how IRS debt expires after 10 years. But there are a few things that you need to know because sometimes it's not exactly 10 years. So let's get to it. What is the CSED? Quite simply, the CSED, which stands for Collection Statute Expiration Date, is the amount of time the IRS has to collect a tax debt. By law, the IRS only has 10 years to collect a debt from a taxpayer. However, there are some things that can pause that clock, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. But right now, I'm sure you're wondering, when does a 10-year clock actually start? The CSED clock starts when the tax is assessed by the IRS. Now, what is an assessment? An assessment is basically when the IRS takes some type of action and codes against your account, basically your social security number. Examples of assessments include when you file a tax return and you have a balance due, or you file your tax return late or you pay the amount owed late and you get charged a penalty for doing so. When the IRS files what's known as a substitute for return or an SFR, basically you didn't file the return, the IRS files it for you, it creates a tax liability, and they say you owe. If you're a business and you didn't pay the payroll taxes that employees told you that they wanted to have withheld, and then the IRS finds you responsible, they can assess what's known as a trust fund recovery penalty, and that is an assessment. So as you can see, sometimes the 10-year clock starts around the year the return is due, in the case of you filing the return on time, but sometimes it doesn't. So if the IRS files a substitute for return or SFR, they usually don't do it until several years after the original return was due. Therefore, the 10-year clock starts later than the tax year of the return. If the IRS examines or audits your return, they usually do that later. And if they find something wrong and they hit you with more tax, that creates a separate assessment. Oh yeah, and then there is what's known as a separate assessment. So say you were divorced and there was a tax problem and the other spouse says that they didn't owe it and it was really your responsibility, the IRS can then put that on your account as well. And these are reasons why sometimes the 10-year clock is actually much later than when the person thinks it should be. So next, what things stop the clock? The items that can potentially pause the CSED clock are called tolling events. Basically, if you're asking the IRS to consider something, they're usually going to suspend enforcement, meaning they're not going to do nasty things to you like bank levies, wage garnishments, etc. But the time that they give you this relief isn't free. It just stops the CSED clock or it tolls it, and then that time gets added on to the remaining collection period once that event is finished. Some of the more common tolling events include setting up an installment agreement. The time that your installment agreement is pending or being set up with the IRS, plus a period of 30 days after that, all tolls your CSED. If you file for bankruptcy, the time that the bankruptcy petition is being considered ultimately gets added on to your collection statute, as well as an additional 6 months. And if you're pending an offer in compromise, one of those, settle your taxes for less than you owe, pennies of the dollar, fractions of a dollar, all of which are outlawed terms. While your offer in compromise is going through acceptance and processing, your CSED will be tolled, plus an additional 30 days after that. Some of the other things that can toll a CSED are the termination of an installment agreement, requesting an appeals hearing or a collection due process hearing, CDP hearings, or being a member of the military who is performing military-related service in a combat zone. So, as you can see, there's many things that could potentially stop that clock and extend it out a little bit further. Now, what happens when you reach the 10 years? Once you've reached the CSED, the IRS no longer can legally collect that debt. That debt is essentially just written off. If we were looking at a transcript, you would see code 608 right off of balance due. If you had a federal tax lien showing up on your credit report, that lien can and should be removed from your credit report. Now, if it's been 10 years and you're still getting letters from the IRS about owing them money, then the debt is probably still valid. This means that there were probably tolling events, and this is when you will want to have your CSED calculated. And that brings us to the last point. How can you find out your CSED? Now, truthfully, only the IRS knows the actual CSED because it's a date that's stamped on a sheet of paper, given managerial approval somewhere within their massive system. Now, you can recalculate it if you know the steps, which we talk about in a blog post if you're interested, and that's in the description below. Now, we know all the steps to accurately calculate a CSED, account for tolling events, and even question some things that look incorrect. According to a TIGTA audit conducted back in 2013, it was found that roughly 40% of the CSEDs that were recalculated had some errors in them. So sometimes the IRS does get it wrong. So check out the link in the description below to find out how you can calculate your CSED or have us do it for you, for a nominal fee, of course. Now, if you have a question that you would like us to answer in a future episode, then feel free to shoot us an email via the address in the description below. And did you find value in this video? Then please consider giving it a thumbs up or subscribing to the channel. Just make sure you click the little bell icon when you do. That way you'll get a notification whenever we upload a new video. So until we meet again, keep earning, keep learning, and just like that, this chat is adjourned.